Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first video lesson. If you think this is weird, imagine how I feel filming it. This is going to be a review for a majority of the notes. So, at any point, if you're okay with the content being covered, you can just fast forward ahead to the areas that you're still unsure of or that might be new. So we're going to be looking at inheritance. We've looked at DNA, we've looked at genes, the production of proteins, everything like that. So we're now going to be linking all that prior knowledge to inheritance. So pretty much what makes you you based off of your mom and dad's genes. Remembering that genes are small sections of our DNA, and your DNA is made up of 25,000 plus different genes. So it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 genes that are in your DNA. You've got billions of base pairs, which means you have thousands and thousands of genes in there that code for all different types of proteins. What we're going to be focusing on is what these different genes, one, look like, as well as what do they display. So if we're looking at this example of the different flowers produced, we can see that there is both the phenotype as well as the genotype. The phenotype is the observable characteristic. So if you want to think about it, phenotype starts with a P. It's like the physical characteristic. In this case, we're looking at color. So we can see that 3 of the offspring are going to be purple, whereas 1 of the offspring is going to be white. Genotype deals with the set of alleles, which is a new term that we're going to look at in a second, that the organism possesses. Genotype deals with the genes, the genetic sequence that displays a certain characteristic. We're going to be looking at 2 different types of genotypes, homozygous as well as heterozygous. You can see that there's 2 different types of homozygous. We have 2 capital P's here as well as 2 lowercase. These 2 different homozygous genotypes also result in 2 different phenotypes. The homozygous lower p results in a white phenotype color, whereas the homozygous capital P results in a purple color. And we're going to be looking at that in a second. So remember that in humans, in our somatic body cells, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, meaning that in our normal body cells, we have 46 chromosomes. So that is in our body cells, whereas in our sex cells, so our sperm and egg, we have 23. We're going to be primarily looking at this number, 46. We're going to be looking at pairs. When we start talking about homologous chromosomes, this is where we're dealing with a chromosome coming from your mom, as well as a chromosome coming from your dad. So if we were to look here at chromosome 1, one of these would be from mom, one of them being from dad. Each one contains different genetic information. Your mom and dad have different genes. The combination of them produces you. That's why you have characteristics that are similar to your mom or your dad. When we look at these different versions of the genes, that's where we start looking at alleles. So alleles is just a different variation of the same gene. Some examples of that is that there are different colors of hair, different skin tones, different eye color, different height, all these things. So these are the alleles of the same gene. So different variations of the same gene sequence. When we're dealing with a homozygous pair, that's where the genes are the same. So we have the same alleles in a homozygous pair. You can think about with homozygous, we have homosexual where it is interested in the same sex, whereas in heterozygous, they have the different alleles. Heterozygous, in a heterozygous or relationship, you are interested in the opposite or different sex from yourself. So a little way that you can remember the difference between homozygous and heterozygous. Remembering that the genotype codes for the phenotype. So the gene sequence codes for the physical display of that gene. At this moment, can you please pause the video and watch this video on Mendel's pea plant experiment, as this experiment is what led to the discovery of dominant versus recessive traits. So pause the video now and watch that. So now that you've watched the video, this is going to make a little bit more sense. So you can see here that we have a homozygous dominant plant that displays a genotype and a phenotype of purple. We also have a homozygous recessive flower that is showing that it's to be white. The one in the middle is still displayed as purple, but it is heterozygous, which is showing that the purple color is dominant over the recessive white color. In a dominant allele, it is fully expressed in the phenotype of a heterozygote. Okay, so in our homozygous dominant, it's always going to be purple. In our heterozygous plant, it's also always going to be purple. The recessive allele is only ever shown when it is homozygous for that recessive trait, in this case, a white flower. So in humans, some examples of dominant versus recessive traits are the widow's peak, dimples, eye color, detached earlobes, normal vision versus color blindness, curly hair. So here are some different examples that you can try out on your own of what is, in this case, going to be the phenotype displayed. And below here, this is going to be what is the genotype displayed by these physical characteristics. So practice that on your own. One way that we can start to determine this, and what Mendel used in his experiment, is looking at the parents. So the mom, that is sperm. In this case, the dad versus the egg and the mom, and what are some potential offsprings based off of what genetic sequence they have. Are they homozygous dominant? Are they heterozygous? What are they? Okay, so you can use Punnett squares to help to determine the ratio of potential offspring. So what is the chance of your child being colorblind, having long hair, short hair? Obviously, though, this is the very simple way of looking at this. We're never going to be looking at things as just one trait. It's always going to be multiple different traits, and that makes it a lot more complicated, but we're not going to be doing that now. We're just only going to be ever dealing with one trait. So practice that in your notes. What we've looked at so far is dominant versus recessive. So the dominant trait is always going to be the one that's displayed over the trait that is on the recessive gene. In some different examples of some traits, and this is widely shown in flowers, you can also have incomplete dominance. In incomplete dominance, when you have a heterozygous offspring, it is showing a mixture of the two parent generations. In this case, we have a homozygous dominant parent mixing with a homozygous recessive parent, being dominant for red, recessive for white. The heterozygote, capital R, little r, is pink. So it is a mix of the two parents' genes. So in incomplete dominance, the phenotype of the heterozygote is an intermediate between the two homozygous parents. If they were not homozygous parents, so say we had a pink parent combining with another pink parent, we can see that we'll have different offspring. So we'll have a 25% chance of being red, and then we'll have a 50% chance of pink offspring, and then another 25% chance of having a homozygous recessive white offspring. So you can see that depending on what the parent's genotype is, it affects what the offspring's genotype will be as well. So complete these examples on your own before moving on in the notes. Another type of phenotype display that we can have is codominance. So we have our obviously not realistic polar bear mixing with a black bear, and all of their offspring are panda. Clearly, this is not right. If you think that this is right, shake your head, because that is just not how nature happens. So in this, a codominant display is when both alleles in the heterozygous form are fully expressed. So you have a mixing of the two where both the white as well as the black traits are displayed. So it's not a intermediate of the two parents, it is a actual mixing, or sorry, it's both of them being displayed at the same time. So practice these questions on your own, produce your answers. So you can see how we have all of our different examples shown in this picture. We have our dominant versus recessive, homozygous dominant, and homozygous recessive. And then we also have our codominant, where both the traits are displayed, and then our incomplete dominance, where an intermediate is displayed. Our final type of inheritance is with sex-linked traits. So we know that a male is XY, whereas a female is XX. There are certain traits that are carried on the X chromosome. There's also certain traits that are only shown within the male that are carried on the Y. Males as well as females both have the X chromosome, so this is the one that we're going to be paying the most attention to. And we're going to be looking at the alleles that are carried on the X chromosome and how that affects the display if you're both, or if you're a male versus a female. So since females have two X chromosomes, they have to have two alleles for each gene to be displayed, whereas males are XY, they only have to have one allele to display that trait. Some examples of this, of a sex-linked trait, are with hemophilia, so your blood is actually not clotting, as well as color blindness. If you cannot see these numbers, you may be colorblind, or you might need to get glasses. So using our Punnett square, you can try these out. So if we have a human where one of the genes determining color vision is located on the X chromosome, the dominant form, capital C, produces normal color vision. Red-green color vision, or sorry, color blindness in this case, is recessive. So normal vision is dominant, capital C, and then red-green color blindness is recessive, and that is our little c. So a man with normal color vision, so our man, XY, has normal color vision, marries a colorblind woman, so she has to be homozygous recessive to display that trait as it's carried on the X chromosome. So what is the probability of them having a colorblind son? I want you to complete this question on your own and then move into question B. That is it for today. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask.